Hello, welcome to another episode of what's going on in the wave pool. So I have just released an updated image for the wave pool, which means if yours hasn't shipped yet, it'll come with this already on it. If it's already shipped and hasn't arrived at you yet, or you have built your own, or you got one of the previous ones, I would recommend you take a gander over at the GitHub page and uh, get this one installed on your system because it adds a lot of nice little fun upgrades to everything. Um, so I think one of the most notable parts of it to me, might not be immediately noticeable to everyone else, is that I did some little tweaks on how just like the color is being processed in general, which kind of adds a bit more oomph to everything. It was the color was being handled a little coarsely, and now it's being handled a little more finely, I guess. Uh, and it was all just because of me being kind of like sloppy in the programming and stuff, and it all seemed to work all right for a while. But when I compared it to how Video Waves was running, I was like, I can really keep optimizing this if I just keep working on it, and I did. So let me show you some things. So first off, brightness enhance. Now this one works like a contrast knob. So this is all the way, it's still unipolar. This is set all the way off, and then as I turn it up, you can see it just intensifies the contrast. Here, let me turn off all the frame buffer stuff. And you can see how it's really just adding, making the whites whiter and the darks darker. This can be used to kind of like intensify your keying, or if you're doing camera feedback stuff or whatever. It's just like a pretty useful thing. Um, so yeah, that's one of the things. Another thing that we have is that when you go into sort of like the paint mode on either frame buffer mix or on the temporal filter, those kind of work a little bit differently. So I'm gonna play with mix here, and you can just see what happens when I turn mix up all of the way. Here, let me tweak some of the settings here a little bit. And so I turned hue a little bit down, I'll turn saturation up, and I'll turn brightness up a bit. And then yeah, so here is mix mode. So you can see it's kind of doing like some painting stuff, and it's a little bit more controllable than it was before. And if I sort of move around the X and Y things, you get a bit more action going on in that zone. So yeah, that's sort of the paint mode when you just crank mix all of the way up. And then yeah, that's kind of one of the neat things I like too. You can see there's that weird like saturation glitch thing that happens. Check out my forehead. Trying to like max that out as much as possible. Ah well. Forehead glitches, that'll have to wait for me to practice it a little bit better. But yeah, and then if you play around with the hue, saturation, and brightness knobs, you'll find that they work just a little bit differently than they did before. It's not like a huge difference on like just on their own, but you'll find when you're playing around with the feedback zones, I think it's a little bit easier to like dial things in more precisely. It's I guess sort of what I was going for. Um, so another one of the main things that has changed on this one, so yeah, sort of showing you right now how you can dial in brightness a little bit more precisely. And let me turn down saturation a bit. Maybe we can see that as well. So kind of get a little bit more subtle things happening with brightness and saturation. Yeah. And then if you turn the temporal filter all the way up, you get sort of a paint mode out of that too. And this one works a little bit differently. As you can see right here, there's a lot more fine detail happening and a bit more sort of feedback things poking through. And then if I change the mix knob while I've got things keyed in, it'll mix in more of the input. But also if I change the sort of like the temporal resonance, temporal filter resonance, then it'll bring through some more of the input as well. So I'm like fully mixed in on the temporal filter, and then if I just like turn the resonance all the way out, you can see that everything that's unkeyed sort of pops in through and it passes through. And then as I dial up the resonance, it will mix in everything in this really, really nice, fine, and goopy way. So that is a really neat thing. And then as I continue to sort of dial in the different hues, we can get really, really nice, slow oozing patterns. Let me turn the delay down a little bit. So the delay is a little bit slower now. And then I'll play around with the hue knob a bit, and we can see all the sort of slightly different effects that we get off of this. And if I dial down, now I've dialed down saturation all the way. If I dial down brightness all the way, you can see it actually increases the brightness over this. And then when I turn up the brightness, attenuate it more, it actually adds sort of like an edge detection thing happening. So that's pretty rad. And yeah, these are all sort of things that you need to like play around with the different values of luma key, mix, and the temporal filter and temporal filter resonance to really get a good feeling for. But yeah, you'll notice you play around with these, you get a bit more control over everything, which was kind of my original goal, more control. And then one of the other big improvements on this version is that I sort of fixed, so in this video manual previously, you notice that I didn't really go too heavily into what I called like the hue chaos knobs, or the hue chaos like sliders, and that would be hue mod, hue offset, and hue LFO. And the reason I didn't really go into them that well back then is because they didn't really work right. But I managed to fix them. They work pretty well right now. Fixing up the HSB in general is what sort of made them like work out better. So that's sort of why I sort of waited until now until go into them. So now I will, without further ado, try to explain some more of the HSB or the hue chaos knobs. So hue offset, or no, hue mod is the first one. If we're going from left to right, let me key some things in here so it looks you have a bit more of a frame of reference. Turn down the delay time, and then I'm gonna try to get everything at like a pass through here. Okay, so that's pretty close to where we were before. So yeah, the hue mod, just we kind of, it doesn't really seem to do too much on its own. The hue mod is really more for dialing in with different other settings of the hue offset and the hue LFO. But let me just show you what happens when I sort of go through it. So what it does in this context is sort of just change like the base level of where the cycling is happening. But you can see it's not really changing the patterns themselves. After a certain point, the patterns sort of seem to descend into noise. I'm still just slowly raising this knob, and it'll strobe faster and faster. And then at a certain point, it starts to sort of repeat, but not exactly the way it did before. And it'll kind of just keep doing that as you dial it up farther and farther. And then sort of the farther you go in, the more drastically different things you get. So you get this sort of interesting mode where it strobes out for a while, and then like the patterns just kind of disappear. The patterns in the hue just disappear. And then it sort of comes back again, and now we've got this like the tropical fish zone. Then we have oozing slime mold zone and this, and I'm still just slowly moving it up. I haven't even changed the ranges on it. So that is, and then we can kind of get into this fun like strobing area. If I turn down the delay time, you can kind of see what's happening here. It's just doing the same things it was doing before, but faster. But when it like strobes like this so fast, it actually makes like a different color. It creates a different color in your perception than it did before. And then I keep going it up and it slows down again. So the thing to realize about these hue chaos knobs is they're all kind of cyclic. If you know anything about modular arithmetic, there's some modular arithmetic happening here. Yeah, these work really well with like pattern, or not patterns, but they work really well with movement. So you can see as I just sort of like am moving back and forth, it leaves these interesting goopy trails. And yeah, like the main intention I have for these three knobs was, so you notice if you just play around with the hue, changing the hue up and down, you can get some pretty interesting things, but it's just always going to be rainbow stuff. So these three knobs are kind of to like give you different sort of patterns in the hue that aren't just rainbow things happening. So that's pretty much it. Then you'll notice some pretty neat things that happen once you start to mix the temporal filter in. Oh, that's a pretty neat thing where it just like kills all of the color. Let me try this again. This will just kill the color. Interesting. But yeah, then I turn it down a bit and it's... So here's me mixing the temporal filter in. You gotta just kind of find the sweet spots on a lot of these. And if I make the range on this maximum, it'll just kind of like max out in these almost sorts of it's not quite monochromatic, but it'll sort of be like these like dichromatic sort of things happening. If you turn down the temporal filter, you can see a bit more of what's happening. It's these kind of like it's like cycling just back and forth between two colors instead of cycling back and forth between like a full like rainbow range. And then this is a mode I like a lot. This is where it's like just going from like it's got a reduced range of hue cycling here, which I think is pretty interesting and useful. And then as I go pull it back down to maximum, then we kind of get our full hue cycling range and just kind of like the standard things happening again. So yeah, back at the beginning here. And then let's play with hue offset a little bit. So if I turn hue offset down, it'll just kind of like do this, and I'm just going to slowly move it down. Hue offset and hue LFO are both bipolar, which means that 0 for them is right in the middle. And we can see with the hue offset, we're getting some similar sorts of things as we were before, but they're sort of living. They're not like fading out and trailing. And we're getting a little bit more like traveling worms, traveling waves happening. And now I'm turning it up all the way. Let me change this up to the maximum range now. So this is hue offset at the maximum range. And we're kind of getting some similar things as we were with the hue or the hue mod, with a little bit of different flavor. And let me try moving both the hue mod and the hue offset at the same time. They're both at their maximum ranges. And then you can see there's a lot of more patterns that you can get. This weird sort of blobby noise pattern that's happening. And then I can move around the X and the Y a little bit. Try to get some different shapes oozing out of there. Yeah, this is pretty fun. Let me turn up the temporal filter a little bit. Let's see how that dials things in. And then you see just adding the temporal filter a little bit to that really kind of noisy pattern makes the things sort of more colorful for a moment, and then they just kind of die off. And then I needed to turn saturation up a little bit, but then you can get this kind of effect where it's like leaving these like color trails in like a white background, and they're sort of like rippling. And if I just slow down to the delay time a little bit, they'll fade out a lot faster. Then when I turn the temporal filter up to a certain amount, you get this kind of a thing going on. So it's not quite in paint mode, but it's pretty close. And this is pretty amazing. This is kind of like, you know, when you look inside of a geode or something. And you can see I'm moving my hands around. It's reacting to my movement, most definitely. Just kind of like slowly, not really in an obvious way. And then I've turned it up all the way into paint mode. And then let me turn it back down at just that edge point right there. So there we go. So this is a really nice setting for hue offset and hue mod. And now I'm going to play around with hue LFO a little bit. Maybe I need to turn this one up to max to really see what's happening. So here's hue LFO in the mix. So you can see the hue LFO sort of, it changes the sort of overall speed of all the hue cycling. Not so much like the patterns at all, but the patterns are going to be more decided by like the combinations of everything else. But then with the hue LFO, you can get this, like, you can see down at the bottom of the screen, there's that really fine liney stuff. There's like a moire patterns showing up, and that's kind of what you get out of the hue LFO thing. But yeah, all of this is, these are modes that some of you may have noticed. I just did like a pretty big update to video waves, the sort of like the desktop software version of this. Well, actually, this is just like a version of video waves, to be honest, because I made the other one first. But while I was doing that, I sort of realized I should, I was playing around with video waves a lot, and I was like, oh yeah, I should just try to like fix up the wave pool code a little bit to get some of these things happening over there, because I really like these kind of like fine, yeah, here we are, the really fine detailed things you get. And then you see this weird line going right down the middle. I don't really exactly know what that line is. I think that has to do, that seems like a really like something specific to the processing, the graphics processing on this unit. It really gets sort of amplified in certain modes of these. But yeah, let's see what happens when I turn down the temporal filter. What does this look like then? Oh yeah, that's pretty much what I would have expected. And then as I mess around, I'm turning up the hue LFO right now. We're getting sort of strobing fast. And then slower and slower, and then we get to that, find that one oozing point. There's an oozing point. Turn up the temporal filter a little bit more. Get a little bit more ooze. Let me mess around with hue offset a bit. See if we can find a different, yeah, here's a different kind of ooze. And then as I play around with the X displace a little bit, I can control the ooze a little bit more. Let me turn down the hue offset, or the hue mod. And then yeah, you'll definitely find times when it just totally kills the color completely. That's totally normal for this thing. These hue chaos knobs will also do chaotic things to brightness and saturation. Just not quite as much, not quite as often, but definitely will. Definitely something you will notice. And yeah, so those are kind of the main things of the first part. A couple of other sort of bonus things I did was, so I've rigged this up. I wrote some text instructions on the wave pool themselves. If you hook up a USB keyboard to this thing while you're running it and press escape, you'll see some text files on the desktop that'll let you know how you can try out different resolutions. If you want to go out through the HDMI port and try HD, like 720p or 1080p resolutions, you can try those. So you do kind of have to edit some things for that. That's the price, and you'll have slower frame rates if you want to do that. This runs at a pretty steady 30 frames per second normally, and if you want to go to higher resolutions, it's just going to be slower frame rates. There are also instructions if you want to install your own PiCapture SD card to this. There's instructions on how to let the code, how to change things in the settings, so you can get that initialized correctly. And then the other really nifty thing that I'm gonna need to pull the USB camera down to really show you what's cool about this is that I have a different buffer mode. So everything I'm doing is kind of depending on the fact that this video delay buffer is in a feedback mode, and I wanted to try some things out with not having the video buffer be a delay, but just having the video buffer being fed from the camera, which means it'll just be a delay. And then, so I'm just going to hit that button right now. You're going to want to take a look at the documentation and take a look at the manual for like what the new button things and everything is, because it's sort of pointless for me just to describe them over here. I'm just going to hit the button right now that turns off feedback in the delay buffer. So here we are. So you see what happens when there's no feedback. It's really hard to tell that there's anything happening right now. Let me increase the delay a bit. So here we go. This is a bit more easy to see what's happening. Let me key a little bit more out. I can turn up the contrast some more. So what's going on is that it's really just grabbing the feed from the camera and delaying it a bit, and it's applying all the same effects to it that it would be otherwise, like all of these HSB things and all of the temporal filter things will still work. It just won't be, there won't be any feedback. So why would you want to do this? Well, if you just want to have your video feed delayed a bit, like you're doing something cool with the video feed and you want to like have it just be delayed, like this is great for that, and it's not going to like descend into that sort of crazy out of control reaction diffusion stuff. And you can do stuff, you can still do stuff like rotate and zoom and displace and whatnot. You can still do the toroidal universe things. That's pretty cool. I am sort of planning on taking this basic concept of what you can do with like the video just as a video processor and maxing it out a little bit more for optimizing like these sorts of things. But for now, I would say just try these things out. I'm probably not going to change the control schemes too much for the wave pool, because I don't want to make things too complicated for users. But one of the main reasons I like this, and I'm gonna have to pull the camera down and you will stop seeing my face now, is that this can do really fun things for video feedback. And I'm not really sure how many people have tried out the wave pool with you doing USB camera feedback. The thing is that it's pretty amazing for that. So here, let me turn the delay down and turn off all of the sort of wacky things I did already. So right now, this is just USB camera feedback on an LCD screen. It's going to work way better on LCDs than it will on CRTs. But we can see, and then if you, the keying still works, so you can still key in. And then if you just key it completely in, what you're doing, you're working just with delayed image. Let me try to get this about as unaltered as I can. There we go. I think I'm zoomed out. There we go. So this is pretty much just like a pass-through. So one of the neat things you can do with this is you can just delay your feed. So let me just get some kind of patterns happening first. So I'm just turning up hue a little bit, turn up saturation a bit, turn up hue a bit. Then we have some sort of like cyclical pattern thing happening. And then let's see what happens when oh wait, I have a better idea. Here, I'll just invert it. So now we have an inverted thing happening here. It's a bit easier to see the patterns when I'm inverting. And now let me start to increase the delay. So when you increase the delay on like a camera feed, you sort of get a really distinctly different effect from than if you were increasing the delay in like an internal feedback thing. It's kind of hard to describe, but that's why I'm just showing you a video of this. Let me zoom out a little bit. And then I could just keep this camera centered, and then I can actually just rotate the feed for rotational feedback stuff. You notice the rotation happens at the slower rate too. And then I speed it up, rotate it back in, zoom, And then if I mix the temporal filter in, the temporal filter is still going to be doing is just mixing with the previous frame that's in the buffer. So in this case, because the previous frame is, did I reverse this? Is this backwards? Oh yeah, it is. Yoinks. Because the previous frame is not really affected by anything else in the queue. If I mix it all the way with just the previous frame, it's not really going to have the same kind of effect as it did otherwise. But we'll have this kind of really neat sort of super saturating effect. And then I do things like start to play around with the hue chaos knobs. Yeah, let me mix this in a little bit stronger. And I can turn off brightness invert right now. I want to see a little bit stronger what's going on. Turn the delay down all the way. So this is just no delay really whatsoever. And I kind of just want to show you for a bit what happens with all the colorization things. Oh yeah, this is what happens when you mix in the temporal filter negative. It gets this crazy blobby saturation going on. And then I'll mix it in positive, and it just kind of makes everything a little bit more ghostly. Oh yeah, I did add a reset switch for everyone. I don't really recommend that you use the reset switch, but it's here. There's a reset switch. It turns all the parameters to 0. It won't the thing is that you're going to notice giant leaps whenever you move a knob unless they've been completely zeroed out before you hit the reset switch, because that's how digital controls work. They're just going to there's no like sort of latching thing that I have set up for them. I guess I could maybe try to figure out some kind of a latching thing. Maybe I'll look into that sometime. Ha 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 ha. Oh yeah, it's also pretty neat when you turn on toroidal universe in this mode and then zoom out, and you can get these kind of fractal things happening with the camera feedback. Invert saturation. Oh wow. Ha 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 ha. Oh yeah, also some interesting things happen, like a difference mixing when you use like the negative mix modes. Here I'm using the negative mix mode, I'm keying nothing in, and then as I start to key things in, whoa, that gets very noisy. Whoa. Ha 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 ha. Here, let me hit the reset switch just to show you that it actually works. Reset. And then, yeah, you can also do some pretty interesting things with the Luma key into white on this mode as well. So I turned Luma key into white on, and I've got that set about midway through. And let me just try messing around with the hue a little bit. So you can see that it's just sort of ignoring all the blackness and just doing crazy feedback, or doing the crazy like colorized feedback in the middle of the things, which is pretty great for camera feedback stuff. And then I can slow this way down. So I've turned the delay way down. So it's an interesting thing when you're doing keying, you have the delay turned way down, especially when you're luma keying into the white, because it takes so long for everything to catch up. It's pretty awesome. So yeah, that's just a little tiny tour of what's going on with the new wave pool update. Yeah, luma keying into white is pretty weird when you just turn the delay up a bit. But yeah, so that's what's up with that. And I hope everyone has fun with this image. And don't forget to, I don't know, join the Facebook group if you haven't already. And or if you're not on Facebook, I guess I don't have any other kinds of like reliable forums for talking about wave pools and stuff like that yet. Forums for talking about wave pools and stuff like that yet. Although we might, I don't know, might be like making like a message board thing for video art things in the future. I don't know. We'll see how that goes. Seems like it might be kind of a lot of work. But yeah, we'll find out. But yeah, hope you have fun with the new hue, saturation, and brightness stuff, the new sort of like finer detailed painter modes, and the new dry buffer. And I just made the buffer wet now, so it is a wet buffer. And it's still pretty awesome to do the luma keying into white in this mode, as you can see. Ha 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 ha. Wow. I am so easily distracted by this thing. Oh yeah, it won't do the feedback into my mouth this way because it's luma key into white. Because I have to keep my mouth closed, or I should like very much like brighten my teeth. My teeth are not quite bright enough. A little bit. You can almost luma key into my teeth. Enter my teeth. Alright, y'all. I'm gonna fade out into paint mode. Have fun.